the sections program here at the Bar Association. I'm going to ask the other members of my team to introduce themselves. Let's start with Omar.
Hi, everyone. My name is Omar Abdullah. I am the Sections Program Coordinator, teaming up with Carolyn to help support the Sections portfolio. And yeah, that's about it.
Julianne?
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here on, at least on the west side, a lovely sunny afternoon. My name is Julianne Unite. I am the Member Services Engagement Manager, and I lead the team that supports you all section leaders in your day-to-day activities and provide guidance, as well as also lead a team that also supports our new member programming, mentorship programming, our rural practice initiatives, and other member benefits like our insurance marketplace. So again, thank you all for being here, and we look forward to talking with you all later today about some really important stuff.
And Shell.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shell Gigax, and I am the Member Services and Engagement Team Administrative Assistant. I work really closely with Carolyn, Omar, and Julianne to support the sections team, and you will probably see my name on quite a bit of the emails, especially anything coming or going from the sections inbox through WSBA. So welcome, everybody, and thank you all for joining.
Thanks, everyone. For those of you who might not have interacted with me directly, as sections program specialist, I am the staff liaison for all 29 sections, the main point of contact for all the section leaders, and support you in your executive committee meetings, putting on events, planning events, and also working with the team to support elections and budget planning and other programs that you do. So we do have some other staff members and guests present here, and I'll introduce them as we go along. Some logistical reminders and Zoom tips as we get started. If you haven't already, please rename yourself in Zoom to show your section name and position if you like, and if you're leadership or staff at WSBA, your job title. We won't have time for individual introductions, so this helps us to know who everyone is, especially during the discussion portion of the meeting. And do we have anyone on the phone today?
I don't see any phone numbers, Carolyn.
Okay, great, thanks. So we ask that you stay muted unless you're speaking or asking a question. To let us know that you have a question or comment, please use the raise hand feature under reactions or type it into the chat and we'll make sure the presenter sees it. I'd like to thank all of the WSBA staff and governors who are taking the time to be here this afternoon, as well as all of our section leaders. And now I'd like to introduce President Brian Tollefson to share some words of welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. Brian Tollefson, your Washington State Bar Association president for this year. I just want to thank you all for joining this meeting today and participating in the meeting. I hope it'll be a really good exchange of ideas and conversation. So thank you for being here and welcome again.
Thank you, President Tollefson. Next slide. So everyone should have received a copy of the agenda that's shown here. We'll start with fiscal year 23 budget planning, then move on to a number of sections program updates. The second half of our meeting will be led by Executive Director Tara Nevitt and members of the Board of Governors, with an update of the WSBA structure study, as well as time for open dialogue with the governors. As we move through the meeting, each presenter will indicate whether they'll take questions along the way or prefer that you hold them until the end of their presentation. Moving to budget planning, I'd like to introduce Liz Wick, our Budget and Finance Manager.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. As Carolyn said, my name is Liz Wick, and I am the Budget and Finance Manager for the Washington State Bar Association. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit today about the budget planning for FY 2023. So we're already thinking about next year. And This is a pretty quick presentation, so I'm just going to go through it. So I'd ask that you hold any questions till the end, or you can type them in the chat as we go, and then I will address all of them when we get to the end. So I'm just going to dive right in and get started. If you were here last year or you've gone through the budget and planning process with us before, this is going to look very similar. So I can have the next slide, please. So this is the timeline for the FY 2023 budget schedule. So May 2nd, next week, you will be getting your packet, as we call it. That's going to be your worksheets and all the documents that support your budgeting. And I will go through that whole packet here today. We're going to ask that from May 2nd to July 1st, you be working on those budgets. And then midway through that process on June 22nd, we're going to do a drop-in call session. I highly encourage you to come to that, even if you've done the budget process before. I will be there, and your section team will be there to answer any questions you have and to just support you in the process. If you can't make that session and you have questions, please reach out to your sections team and we will make ourselves available to help you. And then, as I mentioned, July 1st is the deadline for you to submit your worksheet, and if you want to do any dues changes for next year. And then following that, we will be reviewing those initial drafts, and then we will, on July 30th, we'll be getting back to you if we have any suggestions or changes. And so after that, after July 30th, we will ask that any final drafts or revisions are back to us by August 26th. And the reason we ask for that date is because then it has to go before the Budget and Audit Committee and the full Board of Governors for approval in September. So that's the timeline. I can have the next slide, please. And so the documents that you will be receiving on Monday are a worksheet to change any budget. Actually, let me back up. You're going to get the worksheet to do your entire budget. Then there'll be a request if you want to change your member dues. We'll also be providing you with your history of membership dues, so you can take a look at that and make some decisions. We'll be providing you with the history of your membership count. We will provide you with a copy of the fiscal policies that's relevant to sections. We will provide you with a CLE split summary, and this will be coming from your sections team. It'll be a part of the packet. And then we will also be providing you with a breakdown of the FY23 per member charge calculation. And again, that will all be coming out to you on Monday. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first piece of your packet is going to be the section budget request worksheet. This is the spreadsheet we're going to be doing the majority of your work. There is a sample spreadsheet attached to the meeting materials today, so you should be getting that after this meeting. It will include the 2019 through the 2022 year-to-date budget and actual numbers, so you have historical comparisons. We do put a narrative column in there, and we ask that you put a brief explanation of any numbers that you put in your budget, just to explain to us, kind of the thought process or the projects you're supporting with those figures. Excuse me. So we'll have you input the FY23 budget dollar amounts and narrative, and then onto that spreadsheet, and those will all be due on July 1st. Next slide, please. In that packet, you'll also have a form that you can use to request a change to member dues. And you only need to fill this out if you're planning a change to the member dues for FY23. And that will be due on July 1st with the rest of your budget documents. Next slide. The section membership dues history. This is just a document that shows what your membership dues have been for the past 5 years. So you can take a look at that. Next slide. And then similar is the section membership count history. So this is a 5-year historical document that tells you what your membership counts have been for the past 5 years. So you can have an idea as you're planning for the next year. Next slide. And then you will receive a copy of the section fiscal policies. There have been no changes since last year, but some key highlights to the fiscal policies as they relate to sections are Excuse me 1 second here. Okay. So the section's fund balance, there should be enough to sustain a consistent level of programming in the event there are severe fluctuations in annual sections membership. So the guideline that we ask for is that you have at least 6 months of expenses in your fund balance, but we also ask that you have no more than 2 years of expenses in your fund balance. And these are guidelines and suggestions, but the general idea is that you should have enough to cover expenses, but you shouldn't be sitting on a surplus. If you're sitting on too much of a surplus, it's probably a good time to start doing some programming. And while you're doing your budgeting, we'd also like you to bear in mind that there are some limits to certain expense categories, the main being lodging and meal reimbursements, gifts, etc. And our section annual budgets are designed to be use it or lose it. What this means is if there's a carryover from last year, for example, if you budgeted to spend in a certain category and you didn't spend in that category last year, you'll need to re-budget for it this year. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, that per member charge. So the per member charge calculation this year came up to be $17.66, and that was approved by the Budget and Audit Committee at the April 20th meeting. It has not yet been approved by the full Board of Governors, so there could be a change, but at this time we're not anticipating one. And a detailed breakdown of that calculation will be distributed with the other budget materials on May 2nd. And next slide. Okay, that's it. So if you have any questions, I am happy to answer them. Okay, I don't see any questions, but if any come up along the way, I'm sure you'll have a lot after you get.
Professor Straight, sorry, Liz, Professor Straight has his hand raised.
Oh, perfect, great.
Just a quick one. Can you send email copies of those slides you just used?
I think we'll be doing that. Julianne, will we be sending out a copy of the slides after the meeting?
Yes, after the meeting, we will be sending all of the slides as well as the recording of this meeting to all section leaders as soon as it's available.
Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
Hey, Liz, this is Kevin. I want to add a little bit to the per member charge, just to give the sections a little bit of context. Is the per member charge last year was $18.92. Historically, the board for the last over 10 years, even if the per member charge, the actual calculation came out to be more than $18.75, the board has voted to cap it at that. So this year it came out lower, and it came out lower because of some of the indirect costs that go into the per member calculation were lower this year. So this year the calculation was $17.66, and that's what the Budget and Audit Committee approved it at, because it's coming in that under the historical cap that they've capped it at for the past 10 plus years.
Okay. Well, as we mentioned before, if you have any questions while you're going through the process, we encourage you to come to our drop-in session or just reach out to us along the way. Once you get your packets on Monday, I'm sure you'll have a lot more questions as you start to see the materials. So you can reach out to me directly or any member of your sections team, and we are happy to help you. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much, Liz. Next slide. Okay, so for the first of our sections updates, we are going to go to Omar to talk about section elections.
Hi, everyone. So it's an exciting time. The election process is fully underway. Nominating committees are currently reviewing applications. All nominating committee members should be able to access the application by now. So if by any reason you are having trouble accessing the applications, please let myself or Carolyn know, and we'll do our best to resolve the problem as soon as possible. This is a last push to bring in applicants, so please use your listserv, social media, professional networks. There's still time to join a section and apply for an executive position. Although you need to be a section member to run for a position, you can still join a section in time to run for that position. So please, do one last push, try to get as many applicants in the door as possible before the window closes. The candidate slate forms are due on May 16th. Ballots are being finalized May 31st. This is a reminder that section chairs and nominating committee contacts should be watching their emails and responding promptly to section communication. This helps us move the process along in a timely manner and make sure that we're hitting all our projected deadlines in time to keep the process moving. And then voting begins June 6th. Final results will be sent to section chairs by July 8th. And just an announcement that some sections are following an alternate timeline. So some of those states aren't going to be applicable to all sections. And the sections that have requested a slight change have been notified. Next slide, please.
Great, thank you, Omar. So as we did last year with design support from our communications department, we've created a fiscal year 21 year in review info sheet for each section. And these are now posted on the section web pages, along with the annual report, budget, and section bylaws. This is a great document to share with your networks and at events as a recruiting tool. You might notice that the information on the info sheets is taken directly from the section annual reports submitted by the sections. And we hope you find these to be useful. Next slide. In addition to our 2 annual section leaders meetings, of which this is one, the sections team is excited to be planning a lunchtime discussion series to engage section leaders in dialogue around topics relevant to section operations, recruitment, and programming. This is an opportunity for interested section leaders to help facilitate the sharing of ideas and tips across sections and learn from one another, as well as brainstorm ideas and solutions to issues common to most or all sections. Our first topic for this year will be what's happening with Open Sections Night. We'll talk about what worked and what didn't, for those of you who recall Open Sections Night, and how it might be reimagined. While we have some ideas for future topics, we're also very interested in your ideas and input. So feel free to reach out to me or put a comment in the spring meeting evaluation as to what you might like to see in a discussion. Next slide. Julianne will share an update on the section listservs.
Hello again, everyone. So every year around this time of the year, WSBA staff do a cleanup of the listservs on the back end. So for the listservs that WSBA staff administer, meaning that the listserv email address ends in @list.wsba.org, we verify the listserv subscriber list with the list of current section members. And in the past, we've done this kind of behind the scenes, haven't really notified anyone about it. It was just a standard operating procedure that we did. Because a lot of the listserv administration is a manual process, meaning adding email addresses to the listserv, unsubscribing folks from the listserv, changing an email address on the listserv to a different email address. All of that is manually conducted by staff. Sometimes when we do the listserv cleanup, it results in some delays in listserv communications going out during the cleanup, as well as folks who had subscribed to the listserv but changed it from their My WSBA email address to something else would get unsubscribed and resubscribed with their My WSBA email address. So What we're hoping to do this year is continue to clean up the listservs, because only section members should be subscribed to section listservs. We are planning to actually communicate that out to listserv subscribers ahead of time so as to not cause any confusion and to provide them prior notice that there might be a slight delay in listserv communications when we are doing the listserv cleanup. So we wanted to let you all know first as section leaders, because many of you and your sections have WSBA listserv that are administered by our team, that we are notifying you all first now, and then in early May, so basically next week, we are going to send mass email communications to all the WSBA section administered listservs so that they are aware that we're going to be doing a cleanup to make sure only section members are currently subscribed to the listserv, and that there may be additional action required from section members if they want a different email address subscribed other than their My WSBA email address. And then we'll send them another reminder before we actually conduct the cleanup, which again might result in a slight delay of dissemination and receipt of listserv messages, but it shouldn't, it would not impact whether or not a message will be disseminated on the listserv if it's during the cleanup. It just kind of puts it on hold until we're finally through with the cleanup. So we wanted to make sure you all know and wanted to be a lot more proactive in communicating with our section members that these things might occur instead of reacting to comments we might get after the fact because nobody knew something was happening. So that is what we are planning for the near future. And I'll pause here right now and see if anybody has any questions about that or anything else that we've discussed up until this point. We are a little ahead of schedule, so maybe it's also a push for delaying of time a little bit. I don't see any hands raised yet or anything in chat.
Oh yeah, this is Randy. I'm trying to raise my hand, but
yes, Randy.
Yeah, so we discussed the issue of work-related email addresses recently, because the issue came up that though WSBA listservs, as we understand it, are not discoverable if the when the WSBA gets sued. I understand y'all get sued all the time. But if we use our own, the email address that we register with WSBA may be our corporate email address. That's very common. And a person or a member may not wish to use that corporate email address for their listserv communications, because if the corporation gets sued, that becomes discoverable. So everyone has to make their own judgment on that. I can't tell you what the general rule should be, except that we've been encouraging at least members of the executive committee of my section not to use work-related email addresses for section communications.
That is an excellent point, Randy, and it's another reason why we are trying to proactively get ahead of communicating the cleanup with our section members prior to doing it, because many subscribers don't use their My WSBA email address to subscribe to the listservs. But the way that our current listserv program is designed, and just basically the way our systems are designed, we don't have any way of subscribing section member email addresses that aren't associated with the My WSBA. We rely on the section member to affirmatively let us know. So in our communications to section members going out next week, we are letting them know that as a result of this cleanup, if you were subscribed under a different email address that's not associated with your My WSBA account, please email us and let us know so we can make sure to resubscribe that after we do the cleanup. Because if that, especially a lot of those emails that are more personal, right, and not the work emails and not subscribed to My WSBA, there's no way for us to really be certain that that Gmail account, for example, it belongs to member, member number 12345, because it's not associated with the My WSBA account. So in our communications that are going out to section members through the listservs in early May, we have a prompt in there to let them know if they need to use a different email address that is not My WSBA to please let us know, and we can get that subscribed. And then it looks like there is a comment in the chat, or question in the chat from Mel from the ADR section. What about adding a line to my WSBA for the selected listserv address? That is a great recommendation. Currently, I don't think our systems are set up to support that right now, but perhaps in the near future or shorter future, we might have the ability to give a little bit more user control to subscribing to the listservs and allowing maybe listserv subscribers to edit their own email addresses. But right now, the system that we have limits the updates to staff, and it's a manual system, and section members or listserv subscribers need to email staff to make any updates to their listserv subscription. But yes, it would save a lot of manual time. I 100% agree with you, Mel. And I know my staff does too, because I don't do it. My team actually does this stuff, so. All right, any other comments or questions on that? All right, I will kick it back to Carolyn to talk about some COVID-19 updates.
Okay, thanks, Julianne. So yeah, last section's update is on our WSBA COVID policies for volunteers and guests. These are currently in effect for all indoor events sponsored by WSBA entities, and details are available on the website with other information and instructions for uploading proof of vaccination. Specifically, volunteers must submit proof of vaccination, including booster, or qualifying exemption to the bar in advance of any event. For guests, proof of vaccination, including booster, or a negative PCR test within 72 hours prior to the event must be shown at the door. Attendees should follow the masking guidelines of the local health department and the venue at the time of the event. For any section events without WSBA staff present, a member of the section executive committee will need to take on the role of confirming vaccine status as guests enter. Thanks so much for your patience and flexibility as we prioritize safety in this shifting pandemic landscape. Next slide.
Hey, Carolyn, it's Kevin. Can we go back to that slide? I'd like to add a little more context to that the vaccination policy.
Sure.
So one thing to kind of delineate here is the volunteer policy actually applies to folks who are serving in volunteer capacities. So for instance, if we're working with you on a CLE, the folks who are the CLE faculty would be volunteers. They wouldn't be attendees necessarily. The same with chairs on a CLE would be considered volunteers and therefore subject to the volunteer policy. Section executive committees who are doing offsite events in person, like executive committee meetings, you would all be considered volunteers and fall under the volunteer policy in terms of proof of vaccination and booster. And then the guest policy is really geared towards attendees at our events. So for instance, if you're putting on a CLE, the folks who are signed up to attend that event are subject to the attendee policy. And so with the attendee policy, we tried to mirror the volunteer policy and make it so that it requires proof of vaccination, including a booster. But we do delineate in the guest policy that if you're in a waiting period for the booster, because there's a 5-month waiting period for the Pfizer and Moderna booster, there's a 2-month waiting period before you get it with the J&J shot. So if you're within that period, you're still considered up to date because you're not eligible to get the booster. So we check at events where attendees are attending. If staff are on site, we check for those things, the proof of that. But if you're at an event, if there's an event where staff aren't present, but there are attendees, we would ask that a volunteer from the section is designated to check those, to either check for proof of vaccination or a negative PCR test for attendees. So I hope that helps kind of delineate between the volunteer versus the guest attendee policy.
Thanks for that clarification, Kevin. And our next slide is just another opportunity to ask questions about any of the section updates. And there's a lot of information that came quickly, so your questions might be slowly arriving. And of course, you're always welcome to send us email with additional questions. This is not your only opportunity by far.
And if we don't have any questions or comments, I think there's some other sections program updates that I'm hoping to share, since we do have some time and we are waiting on some of the facilitators to join us for the next portion of our meeting. One of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention is many sections should have received an email from Curtis Melvin, our member engagement specialist, who has joined us here today as well, regarding our Young Lawyer Liaison to Sections program. And so right now is the opportunity for those sections that are eligible to recruit for their new Young Lawyer Liaison to please submit Young Lawyer Liaison checklist so that we can include you on the list to open up applications and recruitment for that very vital and valuable role that helps to support and strengthen new members and section leadership by bringing new member voices to the table. So I really do highly encourage those folks that received an email from Curtis. I think there's about 22 out of 29 sections that should have received that email to please sign up. It is voluntary, but it is a great opportunity for sections to connect with the new member audience, provide a leadership opportunity for our newest members, as well as potentially recruit new members because you're including new members in your programming and the benefits you offer. So there's that update. And then it looks like Alexis from the admin law section had asked in the chat, does that COVID protocol information only apply to events at WSBA headquarters or any section event in any location? And Kevin responded that it applies to any WSBA events regardless of location. So it's not only events that are hosted at the bar offices. If you're hosting an event at the Mariners game at T-Mobile Park, or you're hosting it in Suncadia, our COVID policies apply if it's a WSBA event. And then I did want to also, since we do have some very key important staff here that do work with sections regularly for a variety of ways, I want to offer them the opportunity to say hi and introduce themselves if they wanted to, like folks from our CLE team. Looks like we might have folks from COM and our Office of Executive Director. So at this moment, while we're kind of waiting for some of the other facilitators to join us, I think we can transition to the next part a little bit early, but I do want to make sure we have some of the Board of Governors in attendance that we're planning to be here present. Does anybody, other WSBA staff, want to say hi and to all the section leaders, particularly if you do work with them?
Hey, Julianne, we have a question from Carrie.
Oh, okay. And so here, Kari added something in the chat. Why does it apply to events such as T-Mobile Park when they do not require vaccinations or masks to get into the ballpark? Kevin, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I can take that question. Curry, the reason the policies apply, even if it's not at the WSBA offices, is there's still a WSBA event. And our goal with these policies is to ensure that WSBA employees, volunteers, members, and attendees at any of our events are in the safest conditions they can be. And so the policies for vaccination in particular are ensuring that at least the folks who are coming to an event from WSBA are vaccinated, boosted, or have some form of exemption. So it's not determined. The purpose is not to have people follow protocols just when they're in our offices. It's to increase the safety of events, no matter WSBA events, no matter where they're held.
So are you going to make people sign something or verify something and send something in before people actually buy tickets through your website for an event like our upcoming Mariners game? Because I don't want to be in the situation where people pay whatever the ticket amount is and then realize, oh, I have to be vaccinated and I'm not, and I want my money back?
Well, what we will do is post, because for your event, Kari, it's going on the website and on our store. And there will be disclosures saying, if you're planning to attend this event, you must meet these vaccination requirements. So they'll have, anyone who's signing up will have notice that they have to be vaccinated. We're not asking, our attendee procedures don't require attendees to clear with us before they go to the event. That would just be unmanageable when you think about all the CLEs and things we're going to be doing. And, you know, we get lots of walk-ins and other things with these events. So the checking happens at the event, but we make sure that anyone signing up for an event has notice that they need to have a vaccination to attend the event. And I think past President Shichetti had his hand up.
I put it down, but I was just going to mention that the Board of Governors considered the policy at the last Board of Governors meeting. And we decided at that point it was too soon to make any changes to our policy. And in fact, we changed it to go back. We did make a change to require boosters, but we will be monitoring the situation and the transition. And as we get into summer, the Board of Governors may be taking another look at our policy once the Supreme Court has looked at its own policies, and we want to, of course, coordinate with them. So this is not something that's probably going to be permanent. It's just for during the time when we're uncertain about the future. We're trying to be very careful.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, Julian, do you think we should move along at this point?
I just touched base with Tara, and it looks like she can start a little bit early. So Tara, if you're ready, we can at least go through the informational part about the structure study and maybe, you know, provide a little bit more information while we wait for the other Board of Governors to attend as well.
Sure. Thank you all for having me. I'm going to do a quick run through of, maybe I'll call it an overview of some of the issues relating to the work that the Board of Governors is doing to examine the Bar Association structure. And as you can see, we have a number of representatives from the board who will be available to hear your comments or your feedback or answer questions or give you their perspective on this work that we're undertaking. And I know everyone is probably in a different place in terms of how much you already know about this. So for some of you, some of this may be repeat, and I apologize for that. For some of you, this may not be enough. I'm going to try and go through fairly quickly. So I want to make sure you know that we do have a page on the website devoted to these issues. There's a 10-minute video that President Tollefson and I did that you can take a look at. It'll be just a slightly deeper dive than what I'm about to do. And I would also commend you, that might be something you want to share with your section members if you're gathering input from them about these topics. There's also just lots of resources there. So I'd encourage you, if you have any interest in this or if your section is following along, to take a look at that page, which Kevin just dropped a link in the chat. Thank you, Kevin. All right, next slide, please. So I think it's really helpful, you know, when you hear that we're looking at the structure, I think it's looking, well, what does that mean exactly? And I think to me, structure isn't probably the best descriptor, because I think we are in part looking at the structure of the organization, but I think we're also looking at the scope of activities. And I think it's helpful to understand a little bit about what our current structure is and how it is similar or different from other bar associations. Next slide. Now, there is a huge amount of variety in terms of what bar associations look like. The practice of law is regulated state by Supreme Courts. So there's a lot of variety, but there are primarily two models. The first model that I want to talk about is the agency model, or perhaps even a voluntary model. And so if you look at this map of the United States, those states that are colored in green, they have this agency model. And in those states, the regulation of the practice of law, and when I say regulation, I'm really talking very narrowly about admission to the practice of law, discipline related to the practice of law, and regulation of mandatory continuing education. So in those states, that regulation is handled directly by the Supreme Court or by an agency of the court. And if there is a statewide bar association, participation in that bar association is voluntary. The other model, which is what we have here in Washington, is referred to often as an integrated or a unified bar association. So when the Washington State Bar Association was originally created in 1880 something, we were actually a voluntary association. And later, the regulation of the practice of law was delegated to the Bar Association. And at that time, membership in it became mandatory. So when I say integrated or unified, what I'm trying to communicate is that not only do we handle the regulation of the practice of law on behalf of the court, but we also contain a lot of functions that you might also see in a voluntary state bar association. So for example, we do a great deal of continuing education. We have sections. We provide help with practice management, ethics advice, lots of activities that you would also see in a voluntary association. And as you can see by looking at the map, this is the more common model of bar association in the United States. Next slide. So then if this is the more common model, and why are we looking at the structure? Next slide. Well, first of all, as you can imagine, whenever you require somebody to be a member of an organization, in order for them to engage in their chosen profession, it calls to question some constitutional questions. And there's long been litigation and challenges related to the structure of mandatory or integrated bar associations. So up on the slide, I have two of the cases that really have been the lay of the land for quite a while. The first case, a US Supreme Court case from 1961, Lathrop v. Donahue. And in this case, the court said that yes, states can require membership in a bar association. And they said that the purpose of that would be the state's legitimate interest in raising the quality of professional services. And they said that you can require it even if that organization is also going to engage in some legislative activity. In 1990, the court again reiterated in Keller that compelled association in an integrated bar is constitutional. This time they set forth a slightly different justification, and this has remained how we think about the purpose of a state bar association, which is the interest of the state in 1, regulating the legal profession, and 2, improving the quality of legal services. This time, however, the court said that the Bar Association can only fund those activities that are tied to that interest with license fees or with mandatory dues. So if there are any activities that the Bar Association is engaged in that don't fall within the purpose of 1, regulating the legal profession, or 2, improving the quality of legal services, those cannot be funded with license fees. And as a result, we have a Keller deduction. So most of you might know that when you do your annual license renewal, you have an opportunity to opt to take the Keller deduction and deduct a small amount of money from your license fee. I think this last year it was somewhere around $8 or $9. Next slide. Now, in addition to the constitutional considerations, our Bar Association is also governed by General Rule 12.2, which is a court rule adopted by our state Supreme Court. There's a lot in this rule, but there's one particular piece I want to pull out because we spend a lot of time talking about it. This rule sets forth all of the activities that the Bar Association can engage in, and it also delineates a few activities that we are not permitted to engage in. And one of these is here on the slide. It says that the Bar Association cannot take a position on a political issue that is not related to either the administration of justice or the practice of law. So those two court cases plus GR 12.2, these things have sort of provided the framework for the last 30 years when we think about the activities of the Bar Association. And this slide sort of shows you the analysis that we go through. So the first question is this an activity that it would be prohibited under GR 12.2? And if the answer is yes, stop. We're not going to engage in that activity. It is outside of the orders that the state Supreme Court has given us. Now, you'll notice that the language in GR 12.2 and the standards set forth in the Keller case, it's similar, but it's not the same. So there is a small universe of activities which arguably, and I say argue because there's lots of arguing, these are very, these are standards that can be debated. They're not black and white. There's a lot of gray area. But arguably, there are some activities that we would be permitted to do by our state Supreme Court under GR 12.2, but that the Keller case might tell us we shouldn't use mandatory license fees for. And so those things that fall into that category, we put them into the Keller deduction. We figure out how much they cost and we put them into the Keller deduction. One thing I do want to point out about the Keller deduction is that, just because we have put an activity into that deduction, it's still not necessarily clear that that is not an appropriate activity of the Bar Association. It's not clear that it's non-germane. Our bylaws call for us to do a very conservative approach and construe anything that might be unclear in favor of the member. So our approach has been better safe than sorry. If it might look like it's non-germane, we put it into the Keller deduction. So this has been the lay of the land for about 30 years. Next slide. So what happened? Well, in 2018, there was a US Supreme Court called Janus v. AFSCME, and this was a case in which the court held that the First Amendment forbids the government from requiring their employees to pay union fees. And in doing this, the court directly overturned a 1977 decision called Abood v. Detroit Board of Education. So why was a union case relevant to this? Well, that case, Abood, had formed the basis of the Keller decision. So a lot of the case law related to unions is deeply intertwined with the case law related to integrated bar associations. And so the question that all bar associations were asking themselves in 2018 is, if Abood has been overturned, is Keller still good law? Can we still rely on this framework for what is appropriate for bar associations to engage in? And so following that case, the state Supreme Court formed a work group at that time led by the late Chief Justice Mary Fairhurst, and they looked into this question for the first time. And at that time, the group decided and made the recommendation to the court, which the court accepted, that there were no changes required to the Bar Association structure at that time. Next slide. So why are we looking at it again? Next slide. Well, there continued to be a lot of litigation after the Janus case. And as you can see on the slide, there were cases in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th Circuit, all challenging the structure of the Integrated Bar Association under the Janus case. And so as we continue to monitor this, including a case relating to the Oregon State Bar and our own 9th Circuit, we continue to have questions about whether the structure of our bar association was going to be under threat, either due to a 9th Circuit decision or a US Supreme Court decision. And in particular, there was a case in the 5th Circuit involving the Texas State Bar Association, where the 5th Circuit found that it is not constitutional for a bar association to engage in any non-germane activities. And that, if that became the US Supreme Court standard, that would be a big shift for us. Next slide. So based on this ongoing litigation, our state Supreme Court asked us to look at the structure again. And in particular, the Chief Justice set forth 3 questions for us at a meeting that he attended. The first was, does current federal litigation regarding the constitutionality of integrated bars require a structure change? The second question was, even if we don't have to change anything right now, what's our contingency plan in the event that we do have to change something later? And then the third question was, litigation aside, is this the ideal structure for the Bar Association? And perhaps there might be some changes that we want to make that would allow us to further our mission. Now, one thing that has happened recently, as recent as I think last month, the US Supreme Court had 3 cases from those circuit courts that were pending requests for cert, and the US Supreme Court denied all 3. So we're still debating and determining what we think this means, but at the very least, it means that as of right now, that framework that I set forth, Keller, that's still good law, at least in the Ninth Circuit. So, you know, one question might be, well, if that happened, you know, have we already answered number 1? And perhaps for now, number 1 is answered, but questions 2 and 3 are still there. The Oregon State Bar case is not done yet. It was remanded back to the district court, so it will make its way back up to the Ninth Circuit. So I think, you know, the good news is I think it takes some urgency away, but I think the Board of Governors is still interested in exploring questions 2 and 3 and making a recommendation to our state Supreme Court. Next slide. So this is our, here's another link to the website where you can look at all the background materials, you can find out about the meetings, you can look at meeting materials. The board has planned 8 meetings. We ended up canceling one in late March because it was right before the US Supreme Court was about to decide what to do with those other 3 cases, and we wanted to see what happened. So we will be scheduling another one, but the board hopes to wrap up its work by the end of August and be able to make a recommendation to the court by the end of our fiscal year. I've bolded the April 23rd meeting, which just occurred, and the July 23rd meeting, because those are 2 meetings that are completely devoted to gathering input from the public and the members of the Bar Association about the questions that the board is looking at. Of course, but I also want to let you know that input is welcome at any of these meetings and also outside of these meetings. So feel free to reach out to your liaison from the Board of Governors. You can write into board feedback at WSBA.org. If you have thoughts about this, the board definitely wants to hear from you, and the court wants this to be an open process with lots of input. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to, actually, let's go to the next slide.
Hey, Tara, I believe the next slide is the ongoing dialogue with the board. So perhaps maybe Carolyn can introduce the Board of Governors that are present here now.
Great.
Hi, yeah, I'm going to let you know who is in the room from the Board of Governors, and then if they each would like to take a moment to introduce themselves, that would be appreciated. So I believe we still have President Tollefson here. We have Bryn Peterson, we have Francis Adewale, Lauren Boyd, and Brent Williams-Ruth. And I realized that Kevin Platchey never got a proper introduction. Kevin is the Director of Advancement here at the Bar Association. So I wonder if, Bryn Peterson, if you might introduce yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm the governor for District 9, which is Mercer Island, Bellevue, and about 15 other cities or parts of cities going down to the north part of Tacoma. I'm corporate. I do corporate counsel law type work here on Mercer Island, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Francis Adewale, would you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Caroline. My name is Francis Adewale. I'm the 5th District Governor for Eastern Washington. I'm based in Spokane. I'm a public defender for the city of Spokane, misdemeanor court, and I'm co-chair with Bryn Peterson of the funniest committee that we are inviting all of you to join, to attend our meetings, the Member Engagement Committee. The Member Engagement Council is no longer a committee, it's a council now. Thank you.
Thank you. And Lauren Boyd?
Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren. I'm the governor for District 3, which is Southwest Washington. I'm a prosecutor down in Vancouver. I'm happy to be here.
And Brent Williams-Ruth.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the governor from the 8th District. I'm also the co-chair for the Washington State Bar Licensure Task Force with Justice Montoya Lewis. I practice estate planning, estate administration, and growing into elder law based in the Federal Way area.
Thank you.
So I think we're going to sort of, hop between these two sections where I think, I want to invite any of the members of the board who would like to add anything initially about the work of examining the bar structure to do so. And then also we can just sort of move into open dialogue with the board members, which could be about the structure, but also could be anything else that is on your mind that you want to talk to the board members about. So does anyone want to add anything to kick us off?
Hey, Tara, it's Kevin. One thing I'll add, I think we've also got past President Kyle Schicchetti here. If Kyle, you want to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, this is Kyle Schicchetti. I'm from Vancouver, Washington. I'm a partner with Miller Nash in Vancouver and Portland office, and I'm the immediate past president from 2020, 2021.
All right, well now, does anyone want to share any initial thoughts? How are things going? What do you want? What would be helpful to hear from section leaders and section members as you're looking at these questions from the court?
Kara, would you like me to go to that slide with the questions? Do you think that might be helpful as well? Or will that be helpful for section member? Okay, here we go. So here are the 3 questions.
And I also see John Strait, who attended and participated in our April meeting. I don't know, maybe you want to add share some of your thoughts.
Well, I can. I don't want to repeat an all-day session. My takeaway, which may not reflect all of the section representatives, but I think is generally accurate, is that the section representatives were collectively not very enthusiastic with regard to restructuring the bar. That the current structure of the bar is generally acceptable, assuming that it meets constitutional standards. So the question 3 would be question 2 would be the fallback, and I think that's very much up in the air. From the section's perspective, my personal takeaway was that a number of the section representatives who spoke and myself are concerned about the practical implications the practical application of GR 12, given the time frame, particularly from the criminal law section and a couple of other sections perspective, of how rapidly bills get introduced to the legislature in our field. There's a very high quantity of criminal law related, excuse me, did I kill this? Okay, sorry. There's a very high quantity of introduced legislation, much of which we really can't tell whether it's going to get legs or not. And because our section executive committee is equally divided between prosecutors and defense counsel by orientation and practice, and requires a supermajority to take a position with regard to any of those matters, if we can meet our super majority requirement where both prosecutions and defense are equally concerned, either in favor or opposed or neutral as to a proposal, we would waiting for the review of GR 12 and getting approval as a practical matter stops that. We can't do it. And that historically, after we adopted our compliance with Keller, resulted, and I was the person who negotiated it, in a position that allowed, so long as the section was clear that it was, if it was testifying or submitting written testimony, that it was doing so only on behalf of the criminal law section with a description of the criminal law section structure, did not require going through the GR 12 committee. Current version of GR 12 does not allow for that. In terms of the constitutional questions, I think there was a collective belief on the part of the section representatives who spoke that the sections are not the same thing as the mandatory dues membership of the bar. All of the sections are voluntary in terms of their membership. And although the Fifth Circuit case would not have recognized that distinction, we believe that there are strong arguments available as to why the sections should be allowed to take positions so long as they don't do so in the name of the WSBA. And the only structural change that was discussed that seemed to have some appeal was not treating the sections as the WSBA, which over my objection and others was done in our last rewrite of our bylaws. And I think that was a mistake. But the fact that the WSBA money does to some degree subsidize the section is not the same thing as the money being used to proselytize, contrary to Keller, and the potential future progeny that may, like Abood, that may affect that. So if you're asking me to generalize what that 7-hour discussion with the sections representatives produced, there were certainly many other topics that were discussed, but those were the ones that were most of interest to me. And I tried to summarize them, I hope, fairly. I understood that the reason that the WSBA was not wanting to allow the sections, other than the possible Abood implications, to take positions in their own name and to distinguish themselves from the WSBA was because of a single event with a single chairman of the Law and Justice Committee who got upset when two different sections of the bar presented conflicting views of proposed legislation. And that was treated as, by that person who complained to our lobbyist, as that quote, the WSBA, I'm quoting what was quoted at the meeting, the WSBA needs to get itself organized and its ducks in a row, but that begs the issue of whether the WSBA speaks through the sections or the sections speak for themselves. And I have testified literally more than 100 times before the legislature over the 40 years that I've been on the, almost 50, on the Criminal Law Executive Committee, both in my professor capacity and as a representative of positions that we took by the executive committee vote. And we've never had a problem distinguishing ourselves from the WSBA. That's what our presentations begin with, whether in writing or otherwise. And I think that one event, which probably reflected more the personality of that particular chairman, was frankly not honestly taken. And that same committee has asked me to opine on bills in my professorial capacity quite a number of times over the years, including in the time frame that comment was made. So I think that the proper response to that would have been, the sections don't speak for the WSBA, and two different sections with different expertises may have different views of legislation, and that is clearly of interest and value to the legislature to hear more than one perspective. I hope I haven't drifted too far into my own pet peeves, but that's I think that the generalized comments that are of interest to all the folks here today were the lack of enthusiasm about a major restructure and opinions about what restructuring as a fallback, if we are compelled to do so, might look like. And I think that those who spoke generally thought that bifurcating the bar was a bad idea, and bifurcating into enforcement and associational, more traditional associational interests was a bad idea, and that other accommodations, if necessary, should be considered first. I invite the board members who are present to correct me if they think I've misrepresented anything.
Professor Straight. Thank you, Professor Straight. Looks like we have hands up from Governor Peterson, followed by Nancy Hawkins.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm definitely a strong proponent for sections. I used to be an executive committee member of the corporate council section. So, you know, I feel strongly that the sections are crucial to WSBA, and, you know, I don't think the importance can be overstated.
There's a reason I didn't answer in the middle of a meeting.
So in any event, you know, these opinions are solely my own. These are not the opinions of WSBA or other governors for that matter. But the way I look at it is, you know, as the first question, the denial of cert, obviously I'm not worried about the cases that the Supreme Court denied cert on. As to Crow, my personal opinion is that the chance that a ruling comes down on that makes us change our structure is, you know, very, very small, close to zero. And if they were to rule that way, we would have years, you know, a couple of years before that would happen. So we'd have plenty of time to, you know, do any contingencies. Going to number two, I mean, I think number two is pretty simple. I mean, every organization should have contingency plans in place. I mean, that's just kind of the, you know, when I was at VP of Legal at Treetop, we had contingency plans for everything. So the idea to have a contingency plan if something comes up that makes us change is just kind of common sense and kind of something any good organization would have in place. As to number three, you know, I think that's where everybody's kind of at right now in terms of, okay, you know, let's not worry about the litigation. Is there a better way to do this? I haven't heard of one yet. I'm still kind of waiting for, you know, the compelling reason to make a change and why that change should happen. I just haven't heard it from anybody. I agree with Professor Straight. I mean, all the sections we've heard from, whether at the last ethos meeting or through letters or things of that nature, all indicate frankly, either a strong desire to, you know, keep the status quo or at least, you know, happy with the status quo at a minimum. So, but I think my main point being is it is really important for us to hear from, we've already heard from a number of sections, but for those that are on this call, I mean, feel free to give us your opinion if, you know, even if it's not the opinion of your section. I mean, I think just your opinion alone is valuable, but I would encourage everybody to go back to their sections and, you know, draft a letter on behalf of the section or, you know, reach some consensus as to what the sections want. At least in my mind, I'm going to be swayed heavily by what the sections tell me they want or do not want. And I can tell you that unless somebody brings me a compelling reason to make a change, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to vote to make a change because I think what we have right now is very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Peterson. Nancy, you're up next, and then past President Cicchetti.
Thanks. I'm going to talk briefly. My notes from my talk last week are on the corner of my desk, and I've been dealing with back spasms for 3 days, so I can't actually reach it. So I'll do my best to just cover a couple points here. The sections have made it clear that they are not interested in a bifurcated bar association. all the comments in the past, and I apologize for not signing in earlier. I was out yesterday, so I've been frantically trying to submit a couple things that were due today. The sections don't want, well, first of all, let's address the myth that sections want to be free and that sections want to be relieved of any obligations of the Bar Association. While that we have certainly at times complained about certain restrictions and rules that seemed to have been put in place in a somewhat arbitrary manner, I think sections are on board to try and work with the case law that actually affects us and move forward in that direction. There is a myth that bifurcating will somehow be cheaper for members. And all evidence is really to the contrary, because the licensing, regulation, discipline of lawyers is a huge part of what the Bar Association actually does. But seems to be this ongoing myth that if that's all the bar did, members would only have to pay $100 and life would be great. And again, there's no proof of that whatsoever. And we'd be throwing out an awful lot of very hard and valuable work for a myth without evidence to support it. I think we all want good licensing, good regulation, and good discipline, but it doesn't come cheap either. The work of sections is by and large, if not entirely, paid by the per member charge that is charged to sections. We are not financially supported by the Bar Association. We are, it's organized in a way that where we receive assistance, which we then reimburse the bar for, but it is not in any way, shape, or form free. Nonetheless, and because it's not free, it means that it isn't the cause for a higher annual dues payment for lawyers to be licensed as lawyers. So that's another myth that we need to really break from and disprove and make clear that that's not the case. So we also need to look at the fact that, and I appreciate all of Professor Straight's comments with regard to legislative work, but I would guess that 95% of what sections do has nothing to do with the legislature. It has to do with seminars. It has to do with putting out materials that help the members of each section in its subject area. And all of that is beneficial to the members and in turn beneficial to the public. If we are better lawyers, we serve our clients better, the court system runs more smoothly. And we should not look at that as a myth. We should publicize it. We should publicize why it is better for the court system overall, for the public overall, and certainly for members, that sections exist and that they help their members. It's not a false trickle down, it's a real trickle down. And we should be proud of it, and we should speak more of it than we speak of the burdens of having sections. Now, with regard to legislative work, there is no question but that hundreds of bills drop every year. And when a bill, I'm at the family law section, when a bill drops that's in the arena of family law, we read it, we look at pros and cons of it, we look at problems that it creates versus solutions that it provides. And we are often asked for that kind of advice from legislators or legislative committees. And as the primary legal association in the state, the Washington State Bar Association should be proud to provide that input to legislators. And they should be proud that they have sections that are skilled in these individual areas that are available, willing, and educated enough to provide that input. Because again, it results in better laws, which help the public, to a much lesser extent helps lawyers, but largely helps the public and helps the courts. And that is our job. That is our role for us. And again, something we should be proud of, and we should publicize how we help the public and how we help the court system with that work. The family law section, I can't remember a time we initiated legislation, not in my bar lifetime, or bar activity lifetime. But to be able to comment on legislation, pros and cons from our viewpoint is valuable. We had an incident, as Professor Straight referred, about, I think it was 5 years ago. And we had one this year where two sections approached a bill from different perspectives and had different points of view. And this year, we worked out the details, presented points of view to the legislature for their benefit, as easily could have been done 5 years ago. If two sections feel strongly about a particular bill, then that's information, even if it's contrary, that the legislature should know about. If something increases the cost of litigation, but helps the court system, okay, well, that has two purposes. We should be helping the legislature understand that. Does the added fee make it more difficult for the public, or on balance, which is better? These are reasonable considerations to point out to legislators. The questions presented by the court are good questions for us to answer. And I think everybody's in agreement now that question one, the answer is no. The current federal litigation does not require us to make a structure change, despite, gosh, 10 years or more of fear mongering, for want of a better phrase, by various people. That we do not have some Supreme Court decision that tells us that we must bifurcate in 10 days, or we'll all be, unlicensed and sent off to camp or something. Those fear stories that we've been hearing for such a long time have not happened, and we should be resoundingly informing the Washington Supreme Court that our position as to question one is no. I've heard so much about these circuits that don't apply to us. And something happened just yesterday, I think it was in the paper, about something stupid that happened in the Fifth Circuit that made me even more convinced that why in the world do we care what the Fifth Circuit does? And I wish I could remember what the case was. Maybe it was already discussed, since I kind of came in the middle. But the Fifth Circuit, the 10th Circuit, the 11th Circuit, they do not apply to us. The 9th Circuit applies to us sometimes. I mean, technically, of course, the 9th Circuit applies to us, but a particular ruling may not apply to us because we do things differently. Have we printed an article in our bar news that says something bad about, the president and makes more of a political statement than we've ever made? We haven't done that. So even if the 9th Circuit comes down and says that what Oregon did was wrong, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to bifurcate because Oregon did something wrong. It may not even mean that Oregon needs to bifurcate. It just may mean that Oregon gets its knuckles wrapped for a judgment call that the court thinks should have gone the other way. So I think a more prudent approach is to wait and see what happens with the Ninth Circuit in other cases. Now, more specifically with regard to question 2, my concern with the contingency plan is primarily the many, many dozens, if not hundreds of hours that would be spent by staff, by the board, by sections, by other interested people to come up with a contingency plan. I think those hours are better spent doing our actual work. And while I agree with Bryn that in some instances having a contingency plan makes good sense, I do it every day. Oh, if I miss the 5:20 ferry, I'll catch the 6:30 ferry. That's a contingency plan. But spending hundreds of hours to say how we should divide accounts or what we should do with the lease or who gets what staff, we can't possibly come up with a contingency plan that would actually work without knowing what the issue is that we need to bifurcate over. Because if a case comes down that tells us, okay, your bar news is too political, okay, we eliminate the bar news, but we don't need to do A, B, and C other things. So I think it's a waste of time. I think we can't come up with enough scenarios in the multiple contingency plans we would need to develop in order for any one of them to be relevant. With regard to question 3, it's a little like, the quote, and I won't get it right, but, democracy is like the worst form of government in the world, except all the others. We have a structure and it works. And it's been in place in some form for a very long time. Changing it takes more time and more effort and isn't worth that time and effort. We've heard, well, why don't we add 20 more people to the Board of Governors? Well, that makes my head spin because the Board of Governor meetings are already too complicated. In fact, I think Kyle even proposes, 75 more people to the Board of Governors or whatever he wants to, or whatever it's called in Oregon, because he likes to tell us how Oregon does everything better. And I say that in all love and kindness. But, we have a structure. Let's live with it. We can tweak it over the years. But with regard to this entirely different idea of making major changes in our structure, this was looked at 10 years ago, it was looked at 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Enough. I don't know why, but let's do our work instead of continually revisiting the same issues over and over and over again. It does us no good. It causes a lot of dissension and distrust and costs a lot of money, both actual money and staff time. And nobody wants it. So, the only thing I ever hear in terms of, at the upper levels of the Bar Association in favor of bifurcation is a fear of lawsuits. And for all of the section leaders in this group, I urge you to look at the Board of Governors materials each month, because each month there's a couple pages about the lawsuits filed against the Bar Association and what the status of them are. And those lawsuits are utterly frivolous, and you see them over and over again. Blank versus Washington State Bar Association, case dismissed, case appealed, briefs due, and there's all this time spent on these cases that are frivolous to begin with. They get dismissed, they get appealed, that gets denied, they file again over and over again. yes, it costs us time and money, but changing our structure is not going to change those people. And it's not going to change the people like them who want to sue the Bar Association because I don't know, I guess they have too much free time. I don't know. But we can't be afraid of lawsuits. As I like to say, we're lawyers, for God's sakes. We can't be afraid of lawsuits. We sure as heck can't be afraid of frivolous lawsuits to such an extent that we would revise a structure that primarily works for us in the hope that it would avoid these frivolous lawsuits. Okay. Sorry, I talked longer than I expected to without my notes, but.
Thank you, Nancy. Past President Cicchetti.
For the record, I am not in favor of a 75-member board of governors. What Nancy is referring to is Oregon's House of Delegates. And while I do see the benefits of a House of Delegates filled with members from all across our state, all of the section leaders, all of the county bar association presidents, and I think I want to say 450 people who are come together and consider what the Board of Governors has decided and whether it's a good idea. I do kind of like that idea, but the Board of Governors, 75-member Board of Governors is a mess. So let's not do that. I was going to talk a little bit about what Professor Straight said. But before I do, Nancy mentioned a number of different things. I agree with most of what Nancy says. Certainly when I joined the Board of Governors 4 or 5 years ago, and we saw, having gone down and testified before the legislature on various things and talking with senators and representatives, it became obvious to me that more information was better, and opening up the sections to be able to testify more freely was in the best interest of the organization, the sections, our membership, and the legislature getting that information. And so we worked hard, as I was chair of the legislative committee, to put together a policy that was intended to do that. We may not have gotten it perfect, and it's a living, breathing policy that we are continuing to work on. But it was intended to give the sections more flexibility, with one caveat, and this is what I was going to talk about what Professor Straight was mentioning. The issue about whether the sections can freely testify in the legislature, while there's a component of that in the ethos or structures examination that we're going on right now because of Keller and political activity. It's something entirely separate and apart from that, going back many years, about how we struggle with whether sections are actually part of the WSBA or are they not a part of the WSBA. They're not independent 501c3s, they're not entities of any kind, they're not LLCs, and they do get support from the WSBA. And so we've looked at that time and time again, and we struggle with being able to say, from a section's point of view, well, we're talking on behalf of the section and not on behalf of the WSBA, given the fact that, you know, a legal analysis might find them to actually be a part of the WSBA. And they, as volunteers, you as volunteers, may want to be part of the WSBA for purposes of defense and indemnity and other protections that the WSBA provides its volunteers. So that's a separate discussion than the ethos and the structure of the bar and what we want to be and whether we should bifurcate. But it's a continuing dialogue that we've had for years. And you know, maybe we revisit it again. I don't know that it's so important that we do it in in conjunction with the ethos meetings. But certainly, you know, if, and I would reach out to Professor Straight to work with us on this, is that, you know, that analysis has been done. And if we need to reevaluate it, we can, and perhaps we should. But it's, you know, been something that we've been wrestling with for many years. So I just wanted to make those points. Thank you.
Thank you, Past President Shichetti. I wanted to just introduce Governor Matthew Dresden, who's joined us quickly before we move on to the next question. Governor Dresden, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Governor Matthew Dresden, representing District 7 North. Happy to be here. Also, I should say that I'm a former chair of the International Practice Section, and happy to be an alum.
Great, thank you. So I believe we have Governor Brent Williams-Ruth with the next question.
Thank you, Carolyn. I speak not in favor of anything specifically, but as someone who has spent the last 18 months in my term listening to my liaisonships as the sections who are suffering under our current structure, who are being told that the work that they're doing is not germane, that the important tasks and topics that they want to publish in bar news are not permissible. Those voices are not alone. And, you know, is listening to Professor Straight and from Ms. Hawkins, and I can't help but try to think of any equivalent for people to understand. I mean, if the commercial division, the commercial airplane division of Boeing issues a press release, is that Boeing speaking? You know, if that division and the military division had opposing views, do you think that the CEO would let them, the president of each division, issue a press release? Also, if someone wanted to sue a section, who do they sue? You know, these are all elements of the component as to why when a section speaks, people believe that that is speaking on behalf of the entire organization. Trying to parse that out is saying that the Microsoft Excel division of Microsoft is somehow not part of Microsoft. Are they their own division? Sure. You know, it's very much difficult for me to continue to hear the continued pounding of the status quo. It's very easy to maintain the status quo. Standing up to that rolling ball is a monumental task where I've begged members of the association that have written to me, who have engaged me directly as I've been out having conversations on this topic, to come. And the number of people that say, it's not a safe place to speak up. And so I just want to say to all of the section leaders, I've heard you, I am speaking up, and it's the more people who share those views should also feel free to come forward and express those, because as we're hearing, if you don't speak up, there's going to be this belief that everyone's just happy with the way things are. And the way the relationship is all perfect, except for, I know that's not the case. I also want to just make a quick comment about litigation and the fact that as a member of the Board of Governors, trying to avoid litigation isn't that I'm afraid of it. I was a litigator for 15 years. I was an insurance defense attorney. It was amazing. It was fun. And, you know, spent most of my time in the federal district court. And I always like, oh, you're going to threaten to sue me? Okay, go ahead, bring it on. But as someone with a fiduciary responsibility to the 44,000 members, you know, our self-insured retention before our insurance kicks in is several $100,000. And so for each one of those frivolous lawsuits, that is money directly out of our budget and our coffers. And that's your money. That is your dues. And so if we can do something to ensure that we are going to be operating in a way to avoid those frivolous lawsuits,
that's really where we're looking. It's not that anyone's afraid of appearing in court and defending the association. We have an amazing team. We have great in-house counsel and we've got great outside counsel. Nobody's afraid of standing in front of a judge. It's just, is that really, if we go off acting in a certain way and we're inviting people to sue us, is that really what's in the best fiduciary interest of all of our members? So those are the things that I think about when I'm talking about the policies for this organization, is not whether we'd win, but whether it's the fight we're even wanting to, provoke when there's ways we can look to avoid it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think past President Shichetti has his hand up one more time.
Yeah, just real quick, and I'll be brief, but one other point that in response to what Ms. Hawkins said earlier, we're not undertaking the evaluation and assessment of the organization and the structure lightly, and we're not doing it in fear of litigation, as Governor Williams-Ruth mentions. We're doing it as just a part of our fiduciary responsibility to the organization. I was a part of the original structures work group a few years ago, and things have changed since then. It may be not imminent before the Supreme Court, but it's somewhat imminent in the Ninth Circuit. And we're not panicking by any means, but the decision out of the Ninth Circuit, Circuit Judge Van Dyke's concurring and dissenting opinion, says at the very end, if the plaintiffs prevail on that claim, the bar will, referring to the Oregon State Bar, if on remand they prevail on that claim, the bar will presumably need to change its bylaws and maybe its entire structure. That's an ominous statement to see in an opinion coming from the Ninth Circuit. And I firmly believe that it makes all the sense in the world to be prepared for such an incident or an occurrence if that should come to us. And maybe we decide that the current structure is the appropriate structure. I personally believe it is, but we should be looking at this in case we are told that we need to change. Nebraska and I think Texas, both, maybe Nebraska, certainly California perhaps, were given a very short timeline to change, and it didn't go well. I mean, there were struggles doing their changes, and I'd like to avoid that. I'd like to at least be prepared in the event that we're forced with some kind of decision from the Ninth Circuit that affects us. It might not, as Nancy says, maybe it turns on other facts, but maybe it does, and we don't want to be caught flat-footed. So to me, it makes all the sense in the world that we should be prepared should something like that happen.
Great, thank you. I see Ellie Baxter from the International Practice section with a question or comment.
Yes, so I have actually request. So I'd like to request the information the past president mentioned what had been discussed for about 5 years in the past within the board regarding sections being part of the WSBA. So this is separate from ethos issue. So I'd very much appreciate it if the WSBA or Board of the Governors, if you could share the information with all section leaders. I don't think that information is not listed on the WSBA website because it is not the issue under number 1 we are looking at. So maybe number 2 or number 3. I believe the past president also briefly mentioned during the 23rd, the meeting we just had this past Saturday. And so we section leaders, we meet every month, and we talk about, we do talk about, ethos issue, but we also talk about number 2 and number 3, and I am not really aware of what's being discussed in terms of number 3 or maybe number 2. So if you could share what the board is considering as the issues that and how what is suggested, if any, that'd be very helpful to understand the whole issue of this. Thank you.
Hi, Ellie, really quick, and we'll get to President Cicchetti. Kevin did post in the chat the link to that work group with all the materials that arose from that earlier work group a few years ago. It has the final recommendations report, frequently asked questions, and a lot of that information, that research. It's also linked to, I believe that work group's materials are also linked to on the ethos page, the current discussions that are occurring. So hopefully that will be helpful to you as well, Ellie. Past President Cicchetti.
Yeah, and we've done 3 meetings now, I believe, with the ethos structure. And as Executive Director Nevitt mentioned earlier, we have several more to go. One of those is a discussion, I believe, and Executive Director Nevitt, you can help me if I'm mistaken on this, but I believe is a discussion about alternatives, what ifs, plan B, if you will. And so that hasn't occurred yet. And we haven't had any discussions regarding it, but it is certainly something that Chief Justice Gonzalez mentioned during his presentation to us earlier this year. And it's something that I think we would be well advised to do, but it's coming up, and I urge you to take a look at the agendas that I think are posted on our website, and you can find out when that discussion will occur.
Actually, we don't have all the future agendas posted yet, but I can add that the May meeting is going to focus on, so I mentioned in my earlier presentation, there's sort of 2 primary models of bar association, the agency model, the integrated model. There's also a couple of states that have what we sometimes refer to as a hybrid model. That would be California and Virginia. And they're hybrid in that the court itself doesn't do the regulation. It delegates it to an organization that kind of looks like the Bar Association. However, there is also a statewide voluntary model. So at the May meeting, we're going to be hearing from bar associations that have those other models and talking a little bit about how their scope of work or structure differs from ours, is similar to ours. And we're also going to have some very preliminary discussion of sort of potential financial impacts and things to consider if the board wanted to explore a contingency plan related to one of these other models. I think, like others have mentioned, there's so many possibilities of what it could look like. So we're not necessarily going to be putting forth, I mean, these aren't proposals. It's really just trying to help the board understand what other models exist, and begin to understand what some of the financial considerations might be if they wanted to explore any of those models further. And Kevin's actually leading a lot of that work, so I don't know if he wants to add anything.
No, I think you covered it. They're just really, the scenarios are looking, one thing I would suggest is I hope the sections will come to the May meeting, because that's when we're going to go over them. And I believe at the board's request, we're looking at a whole continuum of scenarios. So the continuum runs from one continuum of sort of what would it look like to kind of do tweaks to our structure that might mitigate some of the risk, that are out there with the cases, to intermediary kind of things that I think you'd find very interesting, as potential solutions, all the way through to bifurcation. So bifurcation is the very furthest extreme of the scenarios, and they range all the way across the spectrum that we're going to kind of look at and help the board understand sort of the implications of those if they were interested in looking at them.
Thanks, Kevin. I see a question or comment from Randy Wynn with the World Peace Through Law section.
Thank you. From today's discussion about the value of an integrated bar versus, I guess we should call it a disintegrated bar, I'm getting the sense that bar sections are useful to the legislature in commenting on legislation, even if it's sometimes a bit confusing. Might it be strategically useful to have the legislature's view on this? Because it sounds self-serving for us to say we provide all these services, and should, you know, push come to shove and we have to have a discussion with the court about continuing with the existing structure, it might be helpful to have the legislatures weigh in on the value of the current system. And I feel probably the BOG is the only body which be competent to get that information from the legislature. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Randy. Do we have any other questions? We're at about 10 minutes till time. And I know, you know, we're welcoming questions for the governors from, you know, about anything. I know we've been spending time on the bar structure question, but you can also ask other questions as well. Is there anything else on your mind? I do see a hand. It's a Randy. I think you're on mute, Randy.
Mute is my kryptonite. Sorry, folks. So two things. We're a very small section. So whenever we try doing something such as getting rid of money by putting up a scholarship or something, the administrative overhead is just too much work. We're too small to set up a competition and do all that. I'd like to advance the notion that it might be to the advantage of sections in particular, and the bar in general, if we had some sort of a voluntary unified process for section-sponsored scholarships, fellowships, things like that. My other thing is an observation that most of my section's continuing legal education programs are not oriented around state law. You know, law and peace and stuff tend to be, to the extent that they're are oriented around the law, federal in nature. So we've recently thought about marketing our programs to other states, partly to forward our educational mission, partly because who knows, if we get people to join our section, as it would be a good thing. This is all new because we don't know how to apply for credit in California or anything like that. And I just thought I should surface that as something to think about, because I know the bar serves the members of Washington State's legal community, but our educational programs could be of value more broadly, and making these connections might be helpful. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Randy. Is there anything else, or anyone want to speak to that?
Well, I don't have anything real definitive to say. I'd have to think about it. It's an interesting concept, Randy. The idea of, you know, opening the market to other states, that would be a whole undertaking, because it wouldn't be the section doing it. It would be staff here looking at getting them accredited and doing all of that. And, you know, our primary focus as a Washington State Bar is to focus our attention on Washington State attorneys and the Washington legal system. So with the resources we have, that's where we focus. I'd have to do a lot of cycles. I think we'd have to do internally a lot of cycles on what that would look like, because, you know, it would probably be beneficial, I think, financially, but also you've got to look at what's the bandwidth and capacity when you open up something like that and the added costs that come along with it.
Fair enough.
Okay, are there any remaining questions before we wrap up? Going once? Going twice? Okay, well, I'd like to thank everyone for your time today. I'd like to especially thank Executive Director Taryn Nevitt, Director of Advancement Kevin Placci, and all of the members of the Board of Governors who've taken time out of the afternoon to join us. And as always, I'd like to thank all of the section leaders for your time and dedication and the way that you serve your members and further the mission of the Bar Association. We really appreciate the work that you do and for you joining us today. Just as a reminder, we will be posting the recording of this meeting, the meeting materials, and the PowerPoint slides on the volunteer toolbox. We'll let you know when we've done that. And we'll also be sending the materials and the PowerPoint via email to all of our attendees, along with a link to a survey or an evaluation of the meeting to hopefully provide feedback about what was helpful, what wasn't, and also some questions about scheduling these meetings in the future and what's most manageable for all of you with your busy schedules. So again, thank you all. Thanks to the members of my team, the sections team, for the work that went into putting this on. And we hope to see you at the first discussion series and future meetings. So thank you again and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Good job.